Chapter 14. Lieutenant Nagoyan drove aimlessly around Bolton. He knew what he had to do. He had to go to Angela's house and talk to her about Mary's story. Nagoyan had a feeling Angela believed Mary's story now, and he also believed she had good reason to. He was almost ready to believe it himself, but Angela had told him to stay away from her. She had ordered him somehow, deep inside his brain. He felt compelled to speak with her, but he felt he'd be committing the worst mistake of his life if he got within 10 miles of her. He finally ended up at the Rest Lawn Cemetery, where Todd Green and Kathy Baker had been buried. It was close to 11:30, and naturally the place was locked up, but he kept a lockpick kit in his car and could spring any common lock. Besides, if cops came by, he could just flash his badge and tell them he was on police business. "I'm interrogating the murder victims. They might have something to tell me after all." Actually, he had no idea why he was at the cemetery, but when the lock clicked open in his hands and the metal gate creaked as it swung clear of the entrance road, he felt a cold hand touch the base of his spine. He didn't want to be there any more than he wanted to be in the company of Angela Warner. He had seen many people die in his life, hundreds. He had walked by the torn corpses of recent comrades after a VC rocket strike and not felt as nervous as he did right then. He stepped inside the cemetery, and the cold slowly traveled up his spine to the region of his heart. He couldn't be free of the memory of the green stuff that had grown out of the blood of those two teenagers. When he had first entered Jim Klein's house after the shootings last week, he had been overwhelmed with sorrow. Now he wondered if he shouldn't have felt relief that those two were dead. The grave sites of Todd and Kathy weren't hard to find. It was a small cemetery, and the flowers from the funerals were still heaped up on the uneven dirt rectangles. The two had been buried next to each other. Nagoyan sighed and sat down between them, where the grass still grew green. He asked himself once more why he was there. He felt, in his indecision, that he was missing an important event. He couldn't get Angela's words out of his mind. "Quit following me. Let me do what I have to do. By the time you know enough to believe what is happening, you'll already be dead." What was Angela going to do? Take up where Mary had left off? Kill more of them? The monsters with the green demons in their veins and the red blood in their mouths? The last time he had seen Angela, she had been wiping away the blood that had spilled from her mouth. Whose side was she on? A breeze came up, moaning as it passed through the branches of nearby trees. Yet the moan did not stop when the wind ceased. The sound seemed to carry across the cemetery, to come in waves, like the moan that would come from a living human being if he or she were in pain. Sitting where he was, Nagoyan's heart began to pound silently. The moaning was not coming from the wind. It was coming from beside him, below him. "Save us, Lord Buddha," he whispered. Nagoyan leaned over and cocked his head above the grave of Todd Green. He didn't actually put his ear to the soil, which would have been the best procedure to follow if the moan were truly coming from under the ground, and he wanted to verify that fact. He had a fear, it was ridiculous, but then again, so was what he was hearing, that a hand might reach up out of the soil and grab him and pull him under, or at least pull off his ear. Tran Quan, that tyrant in his company in Nam, collected the ears of the VC he had killed. Once Nagoyan had seen him cut off the ears of one of their own dead soldiers. Nagoyan had always had a thing about losing his own ears. The moaning came again. "Jesus," Nagoyan whispered. He always called upon both Buddha and Jesus when things got really bad. The groan was coming from far under the ground, like 6 feet under. Nagoyan told himself that the only thing down there was a box with Todd Green's corpse in it, and that this was not possible. The groan did not sound fully human, though that did nothing to comfort him. Rather, it sounded more like some kind of huge, hungry animal. Nagoyan leapt to his feet and took 20 quick steps away from the gravesite. There he could no longer hear the sound. That was good. It had never been there to begin with, he thought. He had imagined it. But then Nagoyan made himself take the 20 steps back to Todd's grave, and he heard the moan again. "Stop!" he screamed at the ground. The moan stopped. Todd's corpse had heard and understood him. Nagoyan turned and ran to his car. He started the engine and pulled away from the cemetery at high speed. He had to see Angela Warner, human or not. He had to talk to her. He realized he might have to kill her, if she could still be killed. Chapter 15. They opened the door to the basement near the time she finished feeding. For some reason, the light in the basement had failed, and she had had to satisfy her hunger in darkness. The shaft of light from upstairs stung her eyes. They were up there. She could see them staring down at her. Somebody named Jim was at the front of the pack. "We're going to have a meeting," the one called Jim said. She stood and saw she was soaked in blood. It was everywhere around her, dripping off small chunks of torn flesh. She couldn't remember exactly where it had come from, but it had been good, the blood and the flesh. She could also remember the pounding in her head, but that had stopped, which was also good. The pounding had been painful. She walked to the steps. "I will come to your meeting," she said. "Clean up first," the one named Jim said. "I will clean up first," she said. She went up the stairs, and then up another flight to a room she recognized. It was called bedroom, and it belongs to a human called Angela Warner. She knew Angela. She was Angela. She was that body. It was the body and the clothes on the body that had to be cleaned up. She was alone in the room, but knew what to do. It was called shower, which she could do in a place called shower. That was in the bathroom, which was over there. She understood these things, sort of. First, the blood had to come off. The water came out warm, and it reminded her of the blood. She did not need any blood right now, but knew she'd need some later. The need would always be there, but as long as there was blood, the painful pounding would stay away. The meeting could be about finding more blood. When she was clean, she'd go to the meeting. The water washed away the blood. When she stepped out of the shower, she saw a thing called robe. Angela Warner would put on the robe after shower, so she put on the robe. It was yellow, and her hair was wet as she looked in the mirror. There was no blood. Angela Warner would smile when she looked in the mirror, so she smiled. The smile showed her teeth, which she'd use the next time she needed blood. There was something sitting on the counter of the bathroom in front of the mirror. It was called Picture. She picked it up, a picture of people. She recognized the bodies. Angela Warner, Mary Blank, Kevin Christopher. They were holding one another and smiling. They were, she had trouble with the word, but it came at last. Happy. Happy bodies. She knew the word but not the meaning, but she believed happy meant the pounding had stopped and that there was blood. She decided she was happy and clean. There was something else on the countertop. It was the color gold and shaped like a katu minus its head. She knew what a katu was. She was katu. She was part of the world. Angela Warner's body would change into this shape katu as time passed. If there was enough blood, it took a lot of blood, many killings to become a full katu. She knew that. It was her destiny. But she didn't know why she suddenly put the amulet over her head. It may have been she had another destiny. Even now, so late. A powerful tremor passed through her body. Her mind, her connection to the world and all the katu that were and had ever been, was suddenly made visible in her being. A ghostly red ribbon circled the house and all the katu that were gathered there. It streamed off into the sky and then deep into space, out to where the surviving cells of the world tumbled forever on the surface of misshapen asteroids in the endless black of the abyss. They called to her, and she called to them. They desperately wanted her to stay a part of them and bring the flow of blood among the enemy that had destroyed the world. But something else also called, in a voice that belonged to the body alone. It was the voice of Angela Warner's thoughts. It was the sound of Angela's heart, beating deep inside the body, pounding, not like the pain in the head when the blood was not available, but throbbing with the feelings of the enemy. But who was the enemy? Who had invaded whom? They invaded us. Us. Humans. The red ribbon turned a ghastly purple and began to dissolve along the endless road back to Earth. Then it suddenly snapped, and Angela drew in a sharp breath. Yes, Angela Warner. She remembered who she was, what she was. Not katu, not even with the horrors she had committed. She was human. She was not the enemy. They were evil. "Kevin," she whispered. Tears formed in her eyes. She saw them in the mirror, but she didn't allow them to flow onto her cheeks. Kevin was dead. She couldn't worry about him now. She couldn't think about what she had done to him, or she'd go insane before she could finish her job. But that was easier to say than do. Nausea swept over her, and she turned to the toilet and vomited red junk that made her keep vomiting until there was nothing left in her guts. She hoped to God there was nothing left. "Kevin," she cried softly. The pounding began to throb inside her brain. This time, she welcomed it. Angela whirled and ran to her bedroom closet. Earlier, she'd had trouble tying the smaller bottles of gasoline in a circle with the other 5-gallon bottles. She had finally decided not to put all her eggs in one basket. She had stacked her 8 2.5-gallon bottles behind the clothes in her closet. Because she had gone and buried her grandfather's remains after all, she had not had time to make herself a second fuse. Her second bomb was a last resort bomb. She had figured if she had to light it, she would probably be going up with it. The bottles of gasoline were where she had left them. It was past the time for last resort, she decided. Angela closed the closet door and began to rifle through her desk for a lighter. Luck was with her. She found a bag holding 3 new ones, red, white, and blue, a choice of colors. Ripping open the plastic, she grabbed the red one. The plastic. The dog was standing on the balcony, peering in through the screen door with fear in her eyes. If she blew up the house, Angela thought, she would kill Plastic. A small price to pay for the safety of the human race, to be sure, but she already felt bad for what she had done earlier to the dog. She hurried to the screen door and quietly opened it. Plastic was forgiving. The dog immediately began to lick Angela's hands and whimper as Angela knelt beside her. "Shh," Angela said softly. "You can't stay here. You have to go swim." She pointed. "Jump in the water. Go swim. That's a girl. Go, Plastic. Get the hell out of here." Of course, Plastic didn't jump in the lake. The dog had never liked the water and wasn't about to start liking it. Angela was debating what to do next when she saw Jim come through her bedroom door. He was alone. She glanced at the closet. She had closed the door, but had not shut it. "We are going to start the meeting," Jim said tonelessly. Angela let go of the dog and stood. She tried to keep her voice and face expressionless. "I am coming," she said. "Come now." She stepped into the bedroom. Plastic remained on the balcony. "I need to dress more," she said. "It does not matter," Jim said, watching her. "The meeting will start now." "I will be down in a minute," she said, wondering if the Katu ever argued among themselves. Her eyes darted to the open drawer of her desk, then back to Jim. She had left the torn packet of lighters sitting on top of a box of unsharpened pencils. The red lighter, of course, she had hidden in the fingers of her left hand. She was in a quandary. She didn't want to move in the direction of the desk and draw Jim's attention to it, but she remembered she had left her hunting knife in the top drawer on the right. The way Jim was staring at her, she might need that knife very soon. "What is that you're wearing?" he asked. "Damn, the amulet." "What?" she asked. She could feel the gold chain around her neck and didn't have to lower her eyes to look at the amulet. She began to edge toward the desk. "What is that you're wearing around your neck?" he repeated. "It is decoration," she said. Another step toward the desk. Jim turned his whole body to follow her. He took a step closer. "It looks like Katu," he said. "Yes." "Where did you get it?" he asked. "What?" "Who gave you that amulet?" he asked. She finally looked at him. She touched its gold surface and said a silent prayer of thanks to Shining Feather. If she was going to die, at least she was going to die human. "An Indian," she said. "When?" He was close now, maybe 2 steps away. "Just now," she said. "I do not understand," Jim said. "Where is this Indian?" "I will show you." She strode toward the closet, passing within inches of the desk. But she didn't reach for the knife. Not yet. One hand on the door of the closet, she said, "He is hiding in here." Jim quickly stepped by her and threw open the door of the closet. In that same moment, Angela took a step back, pulled open the desk drawer, and grabbed the knife with her right hand. The stacked bottles of gasoline had distracted Jim just enough for her to accomplish that small maneuver. But Jim had ears. He had reflexes. He was whirling to confront her when she snatched back the knife and stabbed the razor-sharp blade into the side of his neck. "Help!" he shouted, as a fountain of blood erupted over his shoulder. The blood was darker than it should have been. It had a distinct green tinge to it. She had lost the knife in her attack. He reached up with both hands to pull it free as he staggered back a step. She lashed out with her foot, with every bit of her newfound strength, and she caught him directly in the balls. He grunted and bent over, and the blood from his neck dripped onto the floor. "Bastard!" she swore. She ran to the bedroom door and slammed it shut. They were already coming up the stairs. She twisted the lock into place. She did not think that it would hold them long, and she was right. Their first blow on the door brought the sound of splintering wood. Angela hurried back to the closet. She had to jump over Jim in the process. He had fallen to the floor. He feebly reached up to grab her leg, but failed. He was swiftly losing strength. His blood formed a pool around him, and she briefly wondered how many poor souls' blood had gone into his veins to make that weird puddle. "Help!" he gasped. The door shook again. They would be inside in seconds. Angela opened the closet door and grabbed the top bottle of gasoline. She dropped it on the floor in front of her, jumped in the air, and landed on it with both feet. The plastic walls burst. The gasoline spilled over the floor of the bedroom and the closet, around the stack of plastic bottles. The fuel also splattered the hem of her robe. She whipped up her left hand and flipped her Bic. The orange flame glowed like a tiny sun in her eyes. She looked down at Jim. He was watching her. "You waited 100,000 years for revenge," she said. "You wasted your time. You're goners. You're just a bunch of deadheads from a dead world." She paused and smiled wickedly. "I hope you feel pain when you die." With that, Angela leaned over and lit the edge of the puddle of gasoline. It caught immediately. The flames raced into the closet and engulfed her wardrobe and the bottles of gasoline. Her robe had also caught fire, but she didn't stop to try to put it out. Her bedroom door lurched. A huge chunk of wood came smashing in behind the power of an angry fist. Angela turned and ran toward the door to the balcony. It was fortunate she had left the door open. Angela had scarcely crossed the threshold to the outside when two things happened almost simultaneously. The bedroom door burst open, and the front ranks of the gang of vampires barged in. They had only a split second to survey their fallen leader and the fire in the closet before her alternative bomb exploded. Angela experienced a shock wave as the slap of a giant's unforgiving hand, a slap that literally swept her off her feet and off the balcony. She was immediately blinded by the brilliant light, but this was a hand that could strike more than once. A second shock wave hit her as she hovered above the lake. At the back of her mind, she registered the fact that the power of the explosion upstairs had been sufficient to burst through to the basement and ignite the larger bomb. All 60 gallons had gone up. And then a third shockwave hit her, and this one made the other two puny by comparison. She was in the sky, flying toward the moon, anywhere but toward the asteroid belt, and she still understood what had happened. The propane tank had blown. No one, she thought, nothing could have survived that. The fact reassured what was left of her mind and body as she reached the upward arc of her flight and began to fall, down into the cold black waters where it had all begun, and where it would now all end. Lieutenant Nagoyan was 200 yards from Angela Warner's house when it exploded. First the top blew off, then a geyser erupted from deep inside, and finally the white tank beside the house went up like a miniature atomic bomb. A mushroom cloud of fire reached for the stars. Nagoyan immediately pulled over to the side of the road. He thought he glimpsed a figure on fire, kicking and yelling as it flew out over the lake. But then he blinked and the figure was gone, and he didn't hear a splash. Had he imagined it? Nagoyan got out of his car, stood in his suddenly hot night, and watched the house burn. He didn't use his radio to call for help. He imagined everyone in the town of Point had heard the explosion. Plus he wanted the place to burn as long as possible. The people who were inside. He wanted them turned to ash, because that's what Angela must have wanted. He knew it was she who had stopped them, and even though he didn't fully understand what they were, he knew they had been horrible enough. In the orange light of the fire, Nagoyan lowered his head and silently saluted Mary Blank and Angela Warner. Epilogue. 3 months later. Lieutenant Nagoyan walked the shore of Point Lake not far from where Angela Warner's house had stood. Although the fire had been before the winter had come and the snow had fallen, there were still signs of that horrible night to be found. The snow had covered most of what remained of the charred wood, but the black skeleton of a support beam still stuck out through the white blanket, and a few boards from the balcony balanced precariously on the stilts of scarred wood that wouldn't stand the next strong windstorm. Nagoyan made no effort to get too close to the house, however. It might have been a place of triumph. He still believed that, but it held unpleasant memories for him. He had been present when the bodies of the 32 Point High students had been removed from the wreckage. Of course, they had not known then that there had been 32 people at Angela's house when it blew. There had not been a single intact corpse. But there were experts for every task in the world, even the gruesome ones. And maybe Mortician Kim had come to lend a hand. In any case, the burnt remains had been gathered and the teenagers had been numbered and identified, mostly using dental records. Jim Klein, Larry Zurer, Carol McFarland, the list went on and on. Nagoyan had been surprised and saddened to discover Kevin Christopher had also been killed. According to the experts, he had been the only one in the basement when the explosion occurred. There had not been enough of him left to bury. No remains had been found of Angela Warner, though. Not even in the water. Nguyen had made them search there. "Don't, girl," Nguyen called to his dog. She had belonged to Angela and her grandfather. Nguyen had found her wandering around the night of the blow-up, soaking wet and deaf. The dog had yet to regain all its hearing. Kids at the school, classmates of Angela's, had told her the dog's name was Plastic. Nguyen called her that sometimes. "Don't get oil on your paws," he said. "Stay away from the water." Nguyen had come to say goodbye to the area. He was moving to California. Many people were leaving. Point was quickly becoming a ghost town. The trauma from the deaths of so many kids had shattered families beyond repair. They couldn't bear to live and breathe in the same place that had brought them so much grief. Then there was a strange story of the oil spill. Approximately 6 weeks after the explosion, a gentleman by the name of Philip Fraser was attacked while driving his company truck, a full-size propane tanker that was in the area refueling tanks for the approaching winter. Mr. Fraser was unable to explain afterward what had attacked him, except to say that it had come at him from the roof of the cab, and that it was stronger and faster than anything he had ever seen. In fact, he said it was so fast he didn't even see it. The police thought that unlikely, but he stuck to his story. Mr. Fraser had been knocked unconscious in the attack, and his truck had been stolen. It didn't take long for the truck to be relocated, however. That evening, just after sunset, the wells that pumped on the hills overlooking Point Lake exploded. It seems the thief had driven the truck up to the wells, probably coming at them from behind, and had detonated the propane tank in the midst of the small oil field. 2 of the wells had immediately caught fire, and before help could arrive, all 6 were burning out of control. It was like the Kuwait oil fields after the Gulf War all over again. Experts had to be brought in from the Middle East to extinguish the wells, and that took several days. Even more unfortunate, the burning wells served as cover for a much greater catastrophe. There were 6 pumping wells on the hill. In addition, there were another 6 wells that produced a tremendous amount of oil without being pumped. The natural gas pressure underground was enough to drive the oil to the surface. These 6 wells and the holding tanks that stored their oil were also ruptured by the explosion of the propane truck, but they didn't catch fire. Their tank lines were broken, however, and the oil spilled ceaselessly into Point Lake for several days, a black river hidden by the flames of the other wells. Naturally, locals noticed the oil building up in the lake before the other wells were extinguished, but it wasn't possible to dam the flow properly until the flames had been put out. By then, Point Lake had absorbed an oil spill that was irreparable. The cost to clean it up was put into tens of millions by state experts, and it was decided the lake would be drained the coming spring, drained and covered over. It wouldn't do to have such a huge tar pit lying exposed. So Point was a dead town. Better to get out while the getting was good, people were saying. Nguyen agreed. He had other reasons as well. He knew he was going to have to get rid of whatever was sleeping in Todd Green's grave before he left. It was a task he wasn't looking forward to. "Come on, Plastic," he called as he stepped away from the oily shore and headed into the trees. The collie followed happily, wagging her tail. At first, Plastic had clearly missed Angela and her grandfather, but dogs quickly forgot. They were lucky. "Let's go see if we can find any game." The snow crunched under Nguyen's boots as they hiked into the woods. The light was poor. It was close to sunset. He should have come earlier, he thought. The ground turned upward. He had to veer to the south to stay away from the place where the oil had burned and flowed. Climbing the hills was hard work in the soft snow. Nguyen found himself panting and had to take numerous breaks, even though he was in excellent shape. His constant searching also made him tire more quickly than normal. He had come to say goodbye to the area, but was also looking for something he'd seen many times before, ever since the night the 32 kids had died in Angela Warner's house. Nguyen was searching for the remains of a dead animal. He found one a few minutes later. They weren't that hard to find if he knew where to search. The animal was a deer, a doe. There wasn't much of it left. It had been completely gutted by what appeared to be a combination of teeth and knives. Bright red blood soaked into the surrounding snow. The vacant eyes of the deer stared up at him. He doubted the animal had even gotten a glimpse of what had killed it. Nguyen had believed Philip Fraser's story. "No, girl," Nguyen snapped as Plastic tried to lick the blood. "That's bad stuff. Stay away from it. Make you very sick." The dog peered up at him quizzically for a moment. then appeared to understand. She turns to chase something else. Suddenly, the collie froze, its tail going straight up, but the dog did not raise it as a prelude to attack. Plastic whimpered softly. She was terrified. "What is it, girl?" Nagoyan whispered. He searched the woods but saw nothing. Nevertheless, a film of sweat began to gather on his skin beneath his woolen shirt. He remembered the coldness in Jim Klein's eyes, Angela licking Mary's blood, the stink of the green fungus in Kane's laboratory, the groan under the ground in Restlawn Cemetery. A collage of the unexplainable floated on the still air, mixed with the smell of evil. He remembered his glimpse of the burning figure being blasted out over the cold water when the house had exploded. No remains of Angela Warner. No one seemed to know where she had gone. Nagoyan glanced down at the empty eye of the doe. This was the 10th animal he had discovered eviscerated in these woods in the last 6 weeks. All these memories, they made him ask himself questions. What was out there? What was watching him? Something. Then, an even more important question. Why had he come to these woods so close to dark? Foolish. Nagoyan turned back to the lake, back the way he had come. He put a hand on a gun under his coat. It was a futile gesture. He knew he wouldn't have time to use it if he needed to. He called to Angela's dog. "Let's get out of here, girl," he said. High in a nearby tree, red eyes watched the man and the animal depart. The mind behind the eyes was tempted. For a moment it considered attacking, swooping down from its branch and taking what it wished. But it hesitated. It had just eaten. It was not overly hungry. And there was something about the man, about people in general. The creature didn't know if it wanted to feed in that way. The creature raised a purple talon to touch the figure at the end of the gold chain that hung around its wrinkled neck, then resettled its leathery wings on the thick branches where it sat. It did not understand why it always did this when it spotted human beings. It had no memory of where the amulet had come from. It had no memory at all, not even of the 5th planet from the sun that had supposedly given birth to it. It had broken the link to that place at the beginning. The creature simply existed and fed while time passed. But as it touched the amulet with its sharp claws, it came to a clear decision not to attack the man. There was something wrong about killing humans. The creature jingled the amulet, and as it did, a faint wave of sorrow touched its mind. It could remember that much. People were not for eating. This has been a Nightfall Audiobooks production of Monster by Christopher Pike. Hi, this is Chris with Nightfall Audiobooks. Thank you for joining me for Monster by Christopher Pike. This is one of my all-time favorite books, not just by Christopher Pike or R.L. Stine or anybody. This is one of my favorite books, period. The research done in this with the 5th planet and the reasoning behind the planet exploding because it was an alien world that was filled with vampire creatures and an ancient human civilization destroyed it hundreds of thousands of years ago, meeting with Shining Feather and getting the local Indian color on it. It's amazing. It's really, really well done. It's a new creature, too. It's not just, your typical vampire kind of thing. The Katu are their own alien species that launched a war against humankind thousands of years ago. It's really, really cool stuff. Maybe it's the basis for modern American vampires. Probably is, if they've been around in the culture for that long. And it was really, really cool with the way the meteors impacted the Earth, and there's 2 lakes and they're the same. I like Angela. I like Jim. Jim was great. He was fun to hate. You couldn't really hate Jim too much because, he's turning into a monster, and what do you expect of the guy? I loved Lieutenant Nagoyan. I like Martin. I like the other cops that were involved. I like how the entire thing was handled. It's a tragedy that Mary died the way that she died, but I guess it had to happen. I highly, highly recommend this novel, and Christopher Pike in general. If you like R.L. Stine, but you want a bit more adult, 5 or 10 degrees more adult, more characterizations, more depth, and more logic and research, and more meaty story, then definitely enjoy Christopher Pike. Check him out. Whisper of Death is fantastic. Monster is wonderful. Witch is great. As I mentioned before, he did the last vampire series. To me, that is the gold standard of vampire fiction, and it gives you a good appreciation for vampires in general as characters and as storytellers, and not just being mindless blood-sucking monsters. If you liked this, you will definitely enjoy The Last Vampire. So thank you very much for joining me. If you want to get in touch with me, you can write me an email, nightfallaudiobooks@gmail.com. I'm also on YouTube at Nightfall Audiobooks. Feel free to like, comment, and subscribe. I love hearing what you have to say. Give me suggestions. What should I do next? The fun thing about doing this show is that there is so much Fear Street material available that the books that I hold near and dear to myself are completely different than the books that you enjoy. Someone gave me a list in the comments section of the books that they read, and I hadn't read a single one of them yet. And I'm going to get to them eventually. But give me your list. Share with me what you want me to do next. Thank you very much for listening, and I will see you next time.